how did $250 million, I mean, money that was supposed to feed needy children during a crisis, how did that turn into one of the biggest fraud schemes in U.S. history?
That's the question, isn't it?
And now it's dragging a top Democrat's closest associates and even her own staggering personal finances right into the middle of a federal investigation.
It really is. And I think what it shows is that when you have this huge surge of federal money and at the exact same time you decide to strip back oversight, well, you're basically creating a gold rush for criminals.
So it's not if it will be exploited, but just how badly.
And by who? Exactly.
Okay, let's get into this. Our mission today is a deep dive into the legal, political, and ethical fallout all around Democratic U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar. And it's focused on this massive, $250 to $300 million pandemic relief fraud scheme in Minnesota.
Right, and we've stacked up a lot of source material here. It details these stunning convictions of several people who were, financially and politically tied right into Omar's network.
People who just stole federal funds meant for kids' lunches.
Stole it. But the story, it doesn't stop there. Our material also covers this really explosive investigation by the Treasury Department. They're looking into allegations that some of that stolen money might have even been funneled to the terrorist group Al-Shabaab.
While all that's going on, we also have to look at the separate ethics complaints and, the legal findings about Representative Omar's own campaign finances from a few years back.
Which leads right up to today with this intense scrutiny over the just astronomical surge in her reported net worth. It's all tied to her husband's businesses.
It's a really complex web of systemic fraud and political connections, and we're here to give you the shortcut to what really matters.
Okay, so to start, you really have to appreciate the scale. We're talking about the Feeding Our Future scandal, $250, maybe $300 million. And this wasn't just, some petty theft. This was a sophisticated, highly organized effort to exploit the federal child nutrition program, a program that was supposed to be a lifeline during the worst of the COVID pandemic.
The numbers are just staggering. Over 52 people have been charged or convicted so far. So this wasn't one bad apple.
Not at all. It was systemic. It was a multi-layered exploitation of public money. And what's really concerning is that acting U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson has warned this is just one piece of a much bigger problem in Minnesota.
He called it a web, right?
A web that has stolen billions of dollars in taxpayer money. And he's talking about other huge fraud schemes, too, in things like housing stabilization and autism services.
So why was this possible? I mean, how do you steal $250 million from a federal program?
That's the crucial part. During the pandemic, federal officials, they're desperate to get aid out the door quickly, so they radically relaxed the oversight rules.
What kind of rules?
The most basic ones. They waived things like on-site inspections for nonprofits that wanted to hand out meals. They waived verification requirements. Our sources basically describe it as creating low barriers to entry. It was an open invitation.
So the very mechanisms that are supposed to prevent fraud, the inspections, the verification, they were just switched on.
Switched off. And the criminals flooded in.
But what about the state level? I mean, Minnesota state officials were the ones actually handing out the money. Weren't there any checks and balances there?
Well, there were warning signs. And state officials are now facing really intense scrutiny for not acting on them sooner. But the political dynamic here is fascinating. The nonprofit at the center of it all, Feeding Our Future, they had a strategy.
Okay.
When state auditors tried to, slow things down or ask more questions, the organization immediately accused the state of racial discrimination.
Wait, really? So the state was basically put in a bind?
A total bind. Either you keep looking into it and you face lawsuits and accusations of being racist in the media, or you just loosen the reins and let the money fly at the door.
And you can guess which one they chose.
The reports are pretty clear. The threat of legal action and bad press, the political optics, it directly affected their decisions. They were more afraid of being sued or criticized than they were of potential fraud.
And that hesitation gave the criminals the window they needed.
A multi-million-dollar window, exactly.
Yeah, wow. That failure to enforce rules because of political fear, it really shows you how this kind of thing happens. Okay, let's shift to the people who actually capitalized on this, especially the ones with direct ties to Representative Omar's network.
This is where the paper trail gets very, very troubling. Let's start with a guy named Goad Hashi Saiad. He's described in our sources as an enforcer for Omar's campaign.
An enforcer, so a key player.
A key player. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering. His scheme was to falsely claim he was operating a feeding site. He submitted claims for over 1 million meals that were never served.
1 million phantom meals. And what did this campaign enforcer personally walk away with?
He netted about $2.9 million.
$2.9 million. Money that should have gone to hungry families.
And he's just one person. Our sources also detail the case of Salim Ahmed Said. He co-owned a place called Safari Restaurant. And you should know this is the same restaurant where Omar held her big congressional victory party back in 2018.
So there's a clear connection there.
A very clear connection. Said was convicted of stealing more than $12 million.
$12 million? How?
Same method, just on a bigger scale, fabricating millions of non-existent meals. And the records show he used the money to buy a mansion and, maybe most telling, to fund these lavish shopping sprees at Nordstrom.
Oh, come on.
Sometimes spending as much as $9,000 a month. Just on clothes and shopping. This isn't theft because you're desperate. This is theft to live like a king.
The link between the fraudsters and the political network seems undeniable. Now, after this all came out, Omar's campaign did return some money, right?
It did. They returned contributions between about $5,400 and $7,400 from people who were later implicated. But critics say the relationship was much deeper than a few donations.
And they point to her legislative actions.
That's right. This brings up the political firestorm around the Meals Act, which she sponsored in 2020. Now, the stated goal was to expand aid access, but critics allege that the bill actually smoothed out the very verification rules that these fraudsters were exploiting.
So a bill that was meant to help may have actually made it easier to steal.
The allegation is that it removed some of those crucial guardrails at the federal level, perfectly matching the loosening of regulations that made the whole program so vulnerable to begin with.
I can imagine the political reaction to that.
It was sharp. There's a quote in our source material from a whistleblower, Bill Glahn, who said Omar, quote, knew who these people were. And he questioned if she was, quote, terminally naive or knew and didn't care. It's a tough question about a leader's responsibility when her circle turns public aid into a personal slush fund.
Okay, so let's move from the network around her to the Congresswoman herself. Because this scandal seems to connect to a much longer history of questions about her personal finances.
It does. You have to go back to 2019. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board issued a formal finding against her. She was ordered to personally pay back over $3,000 plus a $500 civil penalty for misusing campaign funds.
It doesn't sound like a huge amount of money.
The amount isn't the point. It's what the money was used for that drew all the attention.
Right, and this part gets a little complicated, so let's walk through it. The misspent funds included money she used to file joint tax returns in 2014 and 2015 with a man named Ahmed Hirsi.
And that's the critical legal issue. Because at the time she filed those joint tax returns with Hirsi, our sources state she was legally married to a different man, Ahmed Elmay.
And you can't do that. You can't file a joint tax return with someone when you're legally married to somebody else.
No. The sources are explicit that this could be a violation of federal law. It's a very serious charge.
And this whole situation is at the heart of that big 2019 ethics complaint filed by Judicial Watch, right? What else was in that?
That complaint alleges a whole list of potential crimes.
Right.
Perjury, immigration fraud, marriage fraud, tax fraud. But if you just focus on the marriage issue for a second, it alleges that Omar lied under penalty of perjury in her 2017 divorce filings.
What was the specific lie they're alleging?
In those legal filings, she claimed she'd had no contact with her legal husband, Ahmed Elmi, after June of 2011.
Okay.
But the sources cite evidence specifically, photos from 2015 that allegedly show them together in London, which would directly contradict her sworn statement, and lying under penalty of perjury in a divorce filing. Well, the legal analysis in the sources says that's a felony.
It's just a remarkable convergence of political, legal, and financial scrutiny. And the financial questions, they just keep coming right up to today with this. Just jaw-dropping change in her personal wealth.
That might be the hardest part of this for people to wrap their heads around. Our sources highlight a massive jump in her net worth. In 2023, it was reported at around $51,000.
Okay, pretty modest for a member of Congress.
Very. But now, based on 2025 financial disclosures, her net worth is suddenly estimated to be somewhere between $6 million and $30 million.
From $50,000 to potentially $30 million? Where did that wealth come from?
The disclosures tie almost all of it to her current husband, Tim Manette's business ventures. He has a firm called Rose Lake Capital, valued up to $25 million, and another one, Eastie Crew Wines, valued up to $5 million.
And we should remember their prior financial relationship. Omar's political network paid Minette's other consulting firm, E Street Group, a massive $2.9 million during the 2020 election cycle.
Correct. A relationship she ended pretty abruptly right after she won re-election. And to add another layer of complexity, investors are now suing Minette's current firms for fraud and breach of contract.
So the very businesses that make up the bulk of her new wealth are themselves being challenged in court.
Exactly. When you see $2.9 million in campaign payments, followed by a potential $30 million net worth jump, all while the businesses are facing lawsuits.
Yeah.
It's easy to see why it's a target for intense investigation.
Okay, let's pivot now to the most severe accusation to come out of all this Minnesota fraud, the one that takes it from a financial crime to a global security issue.
The terrorism funding investigation.
Yeah.
We're talking about allegations so serious they got the attention of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He launched an investigation into whether any of this fraud, money stolen from Minnesota kids, was funneled to the al-Qaeda affiliate Shabaab in Somalia.
So a direct allegation that money for American children might have ended up funding a designated foreign terrorist organization. What was Representative Omar's response?
She gave a pretty confident rebuttal, said the claim was false, but she also added a very specific point. She said that if a link were ever proven, it would represent a, quote, failure of the FBI and our court system.
Subtly shifting the blame if something does turn up.
That's how some have interpreted it.
And the political rhetoric around this has been intense. Treasury Secretary Bessent didn't back down at all, did he?
Not one bit. He publicly accused Omar of, quote, gaslighting the American people for downplaying how serious the scheme was, especially the link between the alleged fraudsters and her campaign donations, which, again, she insists were all returned.
This entire failure of oversight has now become a major political issue.
A huge one. House Republicans on the Oversight Committee have launched their own investigation into the Democratic Governor Tim Walz's administration. They allege his team, quote, allowed millions of dollars to be stolen and, crucially, chose not to act for fear of political retaliation.
So we're right back where we started. The state's fear of political fallout created the vacuum that allowed the fraud, the network ties, and now potentially this terrorism funding link.
It's a perfect example of the cascading consequences of weak governance. When officials put political convenience ahead of their duty to protect taxpayer money, the ultimate cost is borne by everyone.
And we should also note how this local Minnesota scandal was immediately thrown onto the national stage. Our sources talk about the rhetoric from President Trump, who amplified the whole thing.
Right. He made some highly inflammatory statements, calling Somali immigrants garbage who destroyed Minnesota. And the sources note that after those comments, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, launched enhanced operations in the area.
And it's just so critical to remember when we look at this, we're reporting on the political fallout that's described in the source material. Whatever your view is on that kind of rhetoric, it shows how quickly a state-level fraud scheme can become a central, highly politicized national issue.
It absolutely changes the policy focus and the political pressure on the ground.
So if we pull all these threads together, what is the single key takeaway you should leave with?
I think the central theme is this. You had a rapid, massive expansion of federal aid during a crisis, combined with intentionally relaxed oversight. That created a perfect storm, a perfect target for organized crime.
And that crime was carried out by a network of people with direct political and financial ties to a prominent member of Congress, Ilhan Omar.
All while that same congresswoman is facing these intense, separate ethics investigations into her own sudden, massive accumulation of wealth and her past campaign finance issues.
Our sources really lay bare these huge, persistent vulnerabilities in our federal aid programs, especially when the need for speed is seen as more important than the rules.
And that leads to a final, I think, provocative thought for you to consider. When you see this kind of systemic exploitation with multiple ongoing investigations into political figures and just the staggering amount of stolen taxpayer money, some of which might have even funded terror, what can actually be done? What mechanisms are truly strong enough to stop powerful individuals and political networks from monetizing public trust when the watchdogs are deliberately told to stand down?
The solution has to be structural, doesn't it?
It has to be, because as the story shows, opportunity, whether it's in politics or finance, will always find a willing accomplice.